Retro review time again, and today I'm dissecting a dynasty. It's time for the Titleist Vokey wedges. As ever for these retro reviews, we've teamed up with Golf Clubs for Cash, one of the leading retailers of pre-loved equipment, and they've provided us some absolute gems to test, like this original Vokey. So if you're interested in getting some value for money in your second-hand gear, go over to the website or on their new app, which is super easy to navigate. So what I've got with me here is more or less the original Vokey. It's the 200 series in the raw finish. Now I've picked this up for the bargain price of $38.99 from Golf Clubs for Cash, which for context is less than I paid for an Indian takeaway for me and the missus last night. And the reason I say more or less the original Vokey is if you look on the history page of the Titleist website at the Vokey wedges, you'll see there was actually one little model just before this in 1999, and this was released in 2000. Everything before that from Titleist was just a Titleist product without the assistance of Mr. Bob Vokey. So Vokey wedges, probably still for me and maybe all of you at home, the gold standard of short game excellence, but I want to see how things have progressed, not just from the press releases I get promising more spin and altered CG. I want to see that in real practical terms. So I've come down to the practice ground. I've got my full swing kit launch monitor because I want to hit some full shots. When I'm testing older wedges, one of the things I really look out for is spin or spin decay. How much spin has it lost from its original state? Now, to make sure this is fair, I've actually got two essentially identical wedges. We're both at 56 degrees and we're also at 14 degrees of bounce, which will make it extra fair if you like. And in terms of the looks, well, there's some striking similarities in the playing position, but there's also a couple of subtle differences that I want to talk about. In terms of the size, the overall head shape and footprint, there's not much in it at all. The hosel length is the same, and the groove pattern stretches the same distance across, and the heel to toe measurement is very, very similar. The one striking difference that I see when you put them down is on the 200 series, the leading edge is significantly rounder. On the SM10 56 I've got in front of me, it's a lot more squared off. And my hunch on that is because back in the sort of very early 2000s, a lot of players and tour pros were still using 56 as their most lofted wedge. It was a little bit later that 58s and 60s became more prevalent. So Vokey, it's something they've done with their modern wedges. When you go into the 58 and 60, you'll see the leading edge a little bit more rounded because people tend to open and close the face on those. They want a bit more versatility in the look of the leading edge. So as I said, because more people were using 56 as their most lofted wedge back in the day, that's probably why this is a little bit more rounded off. So I want to see, as I said, the spin and the performance now. So I'm going to clip a few full shots away. I've got a towel with me to make sure I clean off these faces after every shot because it's a bit wet and a bit muddy and I want to get a true reflection. So let's just clip a few away now. I'm going to start with the 200 series and just aim down this yardage line. Super soft feel that you would expect from a Vokey. It's come out a pretty similar flight window to what I would normally expect. Let me just scroll that down a bit so I can see. Okay, so it's 110 yards of carry, 8,700 revs of spin, and 38 degrees of launch. Okay, not too surprising. That's not particularly high or low spin. Interesting. Let's go again. Again, maybe popping up a little bit higher than I would expect down my sand wedge. But spin's still pretty good there, 9.2 on that one. 9,200 revs of spin, 109 carry, so very consistent there, no surprises. Okay, much the same there again. These are pleased with my wedge game. They're all sat on top of one another. 109 again, 9,300 revs of spin. So these are decent numbers and 38 degrees of launch. That's jumped about a little bit. That's been between 38 and 41. So that's interesting. I'll give you the averages of these at the end. I'm just going to switch over to the SM10 now. So with that SM10, I've already spoken out the slightly more squared off leading edge, which I quite like on these fuller shots. So let's see how this goes. To the naked eye, it's a pretty identical flight window. It's sat next to everything again, 108 of carry, so within a yard of that. A lower launch angle there at 36, and a touch more spin, but only, we're talking about 9,500 there. Let's clean this off. Again, maybe a touch lower in launch, I would say. Yeah, 35 and a bit there. 9,100 of spin, so in the same ballpark, 108 of carry, so really, really consistent. In terms of the intangibles that aren't on the launch monitor, I'm not really noticing any significant difference in feel. They both seem as soft and as solid as one another. So that's an interesting observation for me. There's been no, like I said, in over a quarter of a century, or around a quarter of a century, if you want to frame it like that, you'd expect maybe a different sensation and different materials, but it's all stayed pretty similar. Now, I actually got in some hot water when I was talking about that on social media the other day, that I would have liked to have seen maybe some more innovation from Titleist in the wedge department, but as a lot of Titleist loyalists quite rightly pointed out, you wouldn't redraw the Mona Lisa if you've got a really good product. Occasionally it just needs the odd tweak. Let me just give this a little wipe before I go again. So a lovely tight dispersion. 109 again on the carry. That's popped up a little bit in spin. That's near a 9.8. So there does seem to be a touch more spin on the newer one, which isn't necessarily a surprise, but let's take a look at those averages and really quantify that. Interesting results there. So first off, I've got to say the carry was basically identical, 108, 108.5 yards, so nothing in it there on the carry. And they did get there in slightly subtly different ways, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now, on this test, I was expecting, to be honest, pretty much identical spin numbers. And that might sound strange based on the fact that this wedge is 25 years old and this one's fresh out the wrapper this year. But the reason I say that is the 200 series came about before the 2010 groove rule change from the RNA and USGA. So essentially, if you wanted to play this in some elite amateur or professional competitions, it might actually be non-conforming. And with some other wedges I've tested, even very old wedges that have been non-conforming, the spin rate stayed relatively similar to the newer wedges. So that was what I was expecting to see. And to an extent, I did. Overall, the SM10 wedge was spinning around 300 revs per minute more, but launching a couple of degrees lower. So the reason for that was some fresher, sort of more bitey grooves. You do just get a little bit more time on the face on those bottom two grooves. So the ball tends to shoot out a little bit lower and spins more. And that's been the case of what Vokey have been trying to do since about SM7, SM8, from the tour feedback that they get. The pros like to see the ball coming out lower, more under control and gripping up on the greens. But that's not necessarily the case for everyone out there. So some of the amateurs out there that might be watching this, you might want to see the ball going straight up in the air and get your stop with descent angle, because you might not have the speed to generate the spin that's required. And that's what the case was here. We saw a little bit more launch, about 2 and a bit more degrees out of the 200 series and a little bit less spin. But because of that higher launch, it was coming in at a slightly steeper descent angle. So depending on your delivery conditions and the conditions you're playing in, that might actually do the trick for you. Now, for 25 years of difference, there is some subtle changes there in the performance of these two wedges, but it's not much. So to all you Vokey enthusiasts out there, I hope you're enjoying this video. If you are, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and get in the comments down below. Let me know what your favorite Vokey series has been over the years. So that's the full shots, and it was interesting to see the data, but ultimately with these shorter clubs, it's all about scoring, and it could be getting up and down and saving shots here and there. So we've come to the chipping green. I'm just going to clip a few away. I'm going to spend a bit of time hitting some different shots, different trajectories to different pins. And I want to find out what the differences are here. So let's just clip a few away and find out. Waiting for the sun. Waiting for the sun. Waiting for the sun. So that was a really enjoyable short game session there. I've hit loads of shots with both of those wedges, and it was actually some really interesting results. There wasn't too much in it. Probably what I saw was kind of a microcosm of what we saw on the fuller shots. If anything, the SM10 was coming out just a little bit lower and just felt a little bit grippier on that first bounce. But that isn't necessarily a good thing. What I saw with the 200 series, it maybe wasn't staying on the face as long, didn't feel like it was gripping up as much. But because of that, it was just popping up a little higher in that launch angle, similar to the full shots, giving me a slightly steeper descent angle. And the ball was pretty much pulling up within the same distance anyway, just through a different means, more descent angle than spin. And that's probably a good message. Moreover, above these two wedges, these two individual wedges I'm testing here, if you're looking at second-hand wedges in general, inevitably with wedges of 15, 20 plus years old, you might see some level of spin decay, and that's probably what I'm seeing here a little bit. But as I think I've shown, and what's been demonstrated to me here, is that you can make up that stopping power in other ways through descent angles. So I hope you've enjoyed that little look and that little trip down memory lane of the wedges, and I hope it's given you some good ideas on what might be beneficial to you in your wedge game.